Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Have a very good morning. Okay, today we would like to continue on the next part, okay, which is in the high performance liquid chromatography. High performance liquid chromatography. Okay, basically my note is different from last semester or last what we call from last year notes, because this the notes that I actually make it by myself, so it's much more easier for me to explain to you guys, okay, through my notes. Okay, so here is the course outlines, okay, for the HPLC course, okay, chapter, right? Okay, of course we have learned about the liquid chromatography from Dr. Faizwan. Okay, under liquid chromatography we also have simplified into a few things. For example, the station phase that actually using the what we call the mobile phase that usually using the mobile phase or liquid as the mobile phase, so we can call that as the liquid chromatography. Sorry about that station phase, but again, for the liquid chromatography, anything that the mobile phase is liquid, so we call that we put that under liquid chromatography. For example, TLC, paper chromatography, liquid column chromatography, and of course the HPLC. And in TLC and paper chromatography, we have learned about the TLC, okay, is much more advanced compared to the paper chromatography. Paper chromatography is the kind of the partition chromatography. Why is that? Okay, why we call as the paper chromatography? Why we need to perform the analysis at that particular same time, same day, same sheet, same chamber, okay, same condition and same eluent. Okay, that is the condition for TLC and paper chromatography. We also have learned that about liquid column chromatography, all of these three, including their applications. Okay, why we need that liquid chromatography, where actually we just use the paper chromatography, why paper chromatography is not widely used in today application. Okay, why we still need the liquid column chromatography until today, even though it's kind of classical chromatography, but it's still great, okay, until today. Okay, so that's all about the introduction for previous one. So let's focus on the HPLC. Here is the things that we will learn, okay, in this topic, okay, including the instrumentation, components of HPLC, modes of separation, retention behavior, elution mode, wavelength setting, and advantages of HPLC. At the end, we will look into some of the features of the HPLC, so that will benefit for you guys later on when you would like to what we call apply the knowledge later on in your final year project or during your work later on in the future. Okay, that's it for the introduction and the course outline of the course outline. Okay, HPLC, the common name of the HPLC is high pressure liquid chromatography. Why is that? Because we using high pressure to separate our analyte of interest. And of course, we use the liquid as our mobile phase. That's why we call it as the high pressure liquid chromatography. In the other way around, the old name of the HPLC is high price liquid chromatography, where uh, of course, years ago, when the HPLC is first invented, the price of the analysis using the HPLC is also high. Okay, and the most common names of the HPLC is high performance liquid chromatography. So it's nothing. It will not be asked in your examination. What is the acronym? What is the full spell out for the acronym of the HPLC? I won't ask that, but it's just for just a brief introduction. So HPLC, the most common one is high performance liquid chromatography, because it can perform at a better performance compared to other kind of liquid chromatography that we have so far, such as the paper chromatography, such as the TLC, such as the such as the column chromatography, where the HPLC is high performance compared to the other liquid chromatography. So that's why we call as the high performance liquid chromatography. Okay, let's look into the instrumentation. Okay, the first one is the mobile phase, gradient controller, pump, injector, column, and detector. The mobile phase, yeah, okay, the mobile phase container is consists of our mobile phase that will be used to bring our analytes throughout the column until it reach the detector. And then we have the gradient controller. The gradient controller, sorry to my pronunciation. The gradient controller, sorry again, gradient controller. Okay, is the one okay that we use to set up how many percentage. Okay, for example, we have the H2O and then we have the methanol. Okay, the gradient controller is the one that we set up or we setting. Either we want to set at, for example, H2O at 70% and then methanol at 30%, or we can adjust 50 to 50. Depends on what kind of the mobile phase ratio do you want to use. Or the gradient controller, after this, we will also learn about the isocratic and gradient elution. Okay. There are two types of elution, or there are two types of setup in HPLC. So I just want to tell you in briefly. In the isocratic, in the isocratic, it means that the whole process, for example, the whole process of analysis, for example, the analysis of the process of the separation will take you 50 minutes. Okay, 50 minutes. Okay, for the isocratic, it means that the mobile phase ratio will be the same from the beginning until the end. Okay, again, I repeat, for isocratic elution, that the mobile phase ratio will be the same from the beginning until the end. For example, you use water and methanol 70 to 30 from the initial of the experiment until you reach the end of the experiment. So it remains the same. For gradient elution, okay, maybe I don't write it very well. Gradient. Okay, for the gradient elution, we can change the mobile phase composition, or we can change the mobile phase ratio. For example, 1 to 5 minutes, we want to maintain at 730. Okay, 5.1 minutes until 10 minutes, we want to change into 50, the ratio. And then from 10.1 to 50 minutes. Why my pen is not functioning? Okay, 10.1 until 50 minutes, then we change to 30 to 70, the mobile phase ratio. So that is what we call as the gradient elution. Okay, that is the function of the gradient controller. Okay, the next one is the pump. The pump, that is the thing that suck the mobile phase from the mobile phase container until it will push the mobile phase as well to separate your components. That is the function of the pump. And then the next one, we have the injector. The injector where we introduce our sample. And what is column? Column is the heart of the HPLC. Is the heart of the separation. The function of the column to separate your sample. I think we already learned that a lot. And the detector, of course, to detect your sample. Okay, here is the component of the HPLC. So this is the briefly layout. For example, there is a kind of the question can be asked. Okay, for example, we give you the layout, then we state that, okay, here is X. Please describe X. What is the function of X? Okay, what is the best X you can suggest for that particular analysis? Or what is the gradient controller? What is Y, for example? Can you describe what is Y? Okay, for example, what is the Z here? So you need to be able to describe, or somehow the question can ask you, please draw the schematic diagram for the HPLC. So I think you guys, if you guys be able to understand what is HPLC, what is actually needed for HPLC, I think you guys can draw easily. So in the HPLC, of course, it's liquid, so we need to have the mobile phase container. And of course, we need to have the pump. But to set the pump at the certain ratio, we need to have the gradient controller. And to introduce the sample, we need the injector. To separate the sample, we need the column. To detect the sample, we need the detector. I think if you have that kind of the understanding, you'll be able to describe and also draw the schematic diagram of the HPLC without any problem. Okay, now we will look into detail. Okay, the specific components of the HPLC. We have the mobile phase reservoir, pump, injector, column, detector, and data recording system. Okay. Mobile phase reservoir. If we look into the HPLC rear figure, here is the mobile phase reservoir. Okay. Mobile phase reservoir is the one to contain your mobile phase. Okay. The second one is the pump. But I forgot. No, I forgot. I just left it empty here. Actually, we need to include the gradient controller. Okay. In the pump is to force a liquid through the column. Okay. So I need you put the gradient controller in between 1 and 2 here. Okay. What is the function of gradient controller? Gradient controller is the one that we want to set our mobile phase ratio, or we want to set either it is isocratic or elution mode. So you need to have that one inside here. And then you have the injector. Injector can be either automatic or manual injection. So it should be around this area, but it's not shown lah. Okay. Number 4 is the column, also not shown. Okay. The detector, okay, and the computer to take the signal. Okay. So you don't need to draw this. If I'm asking guys to draw this, I'm also a crazy man. So don't draw this. So you just need to be able to understand this schematic diagram. Okay, because we can see things clearly. Okay. So you need to understand the each components and understand what is the function. Okay. Mobile phase reservoir is the container for the mobile phase, located at the higher than pump. Okay. The container must located higher than pump to aid the flow. Tubing to delivery mobile phase has a free at the end of the filter any undissolved solids or particulate. So in the mobile phase system, in the bottle we have the freight over here. This the small one we call as freight. Okay. So the function of freight is to filter any undissolved solid or particulates before it enter the system. We want to prevent any undissolved solids. We want to prevent any suspended solid to enter our system. That's why we need this freight. So basically, if you handle the HPLC, I always remind the student, okay, if you use the mobile phase, from the HPLC or GC grade directly from the bottle solvent, then it's okay. You don't need to filter. But for example, you need to prepare the buffer, or you need to mix a few kind of acid inside there. For example, you need to filter. It's very compulsory to filter your solvent before you put inside the system, because we want to prevent our system from damage, from any damage. So you need to do that. And other things, for example, okay, for the water, okay, any water or any buffer that you prepare, you need to degas as well to remove any bubble, because if we have bubble in the system, it will disturb the analysis. It will prevent from we get a very good analysis of our sample. Okay, so that is the things that you need to learn. Okay, I believe you will do in the practical on the HPLC. You need to have that kind of the understanding. Okay, the next one, we will look into the ideal properties of the mobile phase. Solvent used in the HPLC should be ultra pure and labeled as HPLC grade, at least HPLC grade. If we have the GC grade, it's better, but HPLC grade is enough, because GC grade or gas chromatography grade is much more expensive. So HPLC grade is good enough. Okay, should be inexpensive. We want to, if possible, we want to have the mobile phase that is not too expensive. If we can use methanol to separate our analyte, we use methanol instead of acetonitrile, because acetonitrile is expensive. Okay, the next is should non-corrosive. Mobile phase should non-corrosive. It cannot be corrosive because if it is corrosive in our system, we have a lot of kind of things, okay, including the tubing, including the pump, that can also be corroded. It can damage the system. The mobile phase also should be inert with respect to samples under analysis. What is meant by inert? It must not react with our sample. Again, our mobile phase must not react with our sample. If our mobile phase react with our sample, it means that we cannot determine accurately the amount, or we cannot determine accurately consistently the amount of our sample. So it is impossible for us to perform a good qualitative and quantitative analysis if our sample, if our mobile phase is not inert. If our mobile phase is reacting with our analyte, so it must be inert. If a UV detector is used, the mobile phase must be transparent at the wavelength of analysis. Okay, what is meant by transparent? The transparent is mean that it will not, if possible, that the solvent will not show any response to the detector, or the mobile phase will not be responded by the UV by the detector. It means that if possible, if we perform the blank analysis, the baseline must be very straight. There is no absorption like this. If we have the absorption like this on our chromatogram, it means that our mobile phase is not transparent. If this happens, it means that it will disturb in our sample. For example, if our sample is transparent, if our mobile phase is transparent, it means that we can detect our analyte more clearly. But for example, if our mobile phase is already have some peaks, then we want to perform the detection of analyte. So if we compare between these two, this one is better and this one is less better, or we can say it's not acceptable at all because our solvent itself already responded by our detector. We need to avoid that. Okay, because of course, if we look here, it's very clear we can go to low detection limit. Okay, compared to this one. Okay, why it is very important to have a very low detection limit? Because in forensic science, we deal the sample in trace amount, so we need to detect at the low detection limit. So if our mobile phase is already absorbed by the detector, so it can disturb the analysis of our sample. So we need to avoid that mobile phase from to be responded by our detector. We need to avoid that. Okay, if a refractive index detector is used, the difference between the refractive index of the mobile phases and the sample should be great as the possible. Okay. Okay, if in a UV, the mobile phase must be transparent. It cannot absorb any UV light. Okay, that is the deal. You guys already understand that, I hope. Okay, if we using refractive index detector, the difference between the mobile phase, the difference of refractive index between the mobile phase and the sample should be great as possible. I think I need to draw that. Okay, or do I have the things? Maybe I can describe later on. Okay, this is the thing for the refractive index detector. Okay, maybe, okay, I just want to describe on that part where the sample Ri, refractive index, must be different. It cannot be equal. This cannot. It cannot be equal to mobile phase Ri. Mobile phase Ri. Ri is the refractive index. Okay, I repeat, the sample refractive index must not be equal to mobile phase refractive index. Why is that? Because, for example, here is your sample, here is your mobile phase. Okay, so I wrote here S and M. Okay, S stands for sample, M is for mobile phase. If the refractive index is the same, so when we put the radiation, so it will go straightly. So it means nothing change. Okay, so when there is nothing change, so detector cannot detect the change. If the detector cannot detect the change, detector cannot give you the reading. So the detector needs some change. So the Ri, okay, this is the thing happen when the Ri is the same. Ri mobile phase is the Ri of the sample equal to Ri of the mobile phase. So we need thing differ. So we have again our sample, we have again our mobile phase. Okay, so when the Ri of the sample is not equal to Ri of the mobile phase, So when we apply the light or the radiation, it can diffract. Okay, it can diffract. Instead of it's going through the straight line like here, so it will diffract. So we have the differences. So the differences of the refraction can be detected by the detector. So that is what is meant by what we call why we need the refractive index of the mobile phase, and the sample should be great as possible. Okay, so for example, you do the literature review, you want to detect the C4 explosive, and the RI is at 3.1. Okay, so you need to have the RI of the mobile phase far less or far more than 3.1. Okay, it must be different, it cannot be the same. Okay, here is the commonly used solvent. Okay, from the hexane anti-water, increasing the polarity. Okay, the hexane is the least polar and the water is the most polar solvent. Okay, so it depends on the kind of the analysis. Okay, next after this, you will learn about the reverse phase and also normal phase HPLC. Okay, in the reverse phase, we use non-polar column. Okay, in the reverse phase again, we use the non-polar column. Okay, so when we use the reverse phase chromatography, we use the non-polar column. So we need to use the polar mobile phase, because if we use the polar mobile phase and when we use the reverse phase, which is the column is also which also non-polar, the solvent will react with our column, so it will damage our column. To avoid the column damage on the reverse phase, so we need to use the polar column. For the normal phase, okay, when we use the normal phase, when we use the uh, polar column. When we use the polar column, we call as the non-polar chromatography. Oh, sorry, normal phase chromatography. Okay. On the normal phase chromatography, the column is polar. Okay, the column is polar, so we need to use the non-polar solvent. Okay, around this area, we need to use non-polar solvent. If we use the polar solvent and the column is polar, it will react with our column. It will destroy our column. Okay, that's the thing. Okay, here is the mobile phase. Again, we have a lot kind of this kind of solver we can use as the mobile phase. Depends on what kind of the phase of the HPLC you want to use. For example, you want to use reverse phase, you need to use this kind of the solvent. Okay, here is the element strength, here is the UV cutoff. Okay, if you look at the element strength here, okay, as the solvent, okay, as the number increasing, it means that the solvent is become more polar. So the methanol is polar compared to pentane. Ethyl acetate is polar compared to pentane. Acetone is polar compared to heptane. Okay, so it means that the lower here, the more polar it is. Okay, this is what we call as the element strength. Okay, here is the UV cutoff. UV cutoff is what we measure to look either is our solvent is transparent or not. Okay, I think I already described about the transparency of the mobile phase. Okay, for example, we want to analyze at 230. We want to analyze our analyte at 230 nanometer wavelength. So here is for our sample. Okay, our sample mass absorption at 230 nanometer wavelength. So which of the solvent here is suitable for analysis of the sample? So we need to find the solvent, the UV cutoff less than this. Okay, we have a lot. For example, is pentane, hexane, heptane. We have the acetonitrile. We have the methanol. So that is the cut of the solvent is suitable. So can we use toluene here? Can we use dichloromethane? Can we use the ethylator? No, it's not suitable because all these solvent shows the absorbent at this area. So more than 230 nanometer wavelength, the toluene, dichloroform, and also dichloromethane can respond to the UV wavelength. So we want to avoid that. So again, if our sample analyte of adsorbent is at that particular wavelength, the solvent UV cutoff must be lower than that. Okay. So again, what is UV cutoff? Okay. For example, the pentane 190. Okay. At 190 and below, it will show or it will respond to the UV, or it can give the reading to the detector. It can show the absorbance reading to the detector. Again, I just want to repeat. For example, in the Astora-Tri 190, the UV cutoff is 190. So if the analysis is at 190 and below, it can respond to the UV. It can show the absorbance reading by the detector. So for the Astora-Tri at 190, so we can do the analysis from the 191 and above, but we cannot do 190 and below. For the toluene, it can do from 284 and below. It cannot be do from the 284 and below. It can done from 285 and above. So the UV cutoff is the limit. Okay, you want to analyze, for example, the sample from 245. So you need to find the solvent that is less than 245. Okay, that is the idea how we choose the mobile phase. So a kind of the question can be asked. Okay, maybe it can provide you the table, and it can provide you the question, the situation. Okay, for example, the analytes show the max absorption reading using UVVs at 240 and 215. Please suggest the following solvent either is suitable or not. Please discuss. For example, it give you toluene and also Astora-Tri. So you need to discuss why toluene is okay, it's not okay, why Astora-Tri is okay. Okay, you need to discuss. Okay, that is the kind of thing you need to be able to understand. Okay, to answer if the question asked in your examination. Okay, in the mobile phase, okay, non-polar organic solvent alone in the normal phase chromatography. Okay, combination of organic solvent and what in the reverse phase chromatography. Okay, so now we learn a little bit into the normal phase chromatography and the reverse phase chromatography. In the normal phase chromatography, okay, here is the RPC, reverse phase chromatography. Okay, maybe I draw like this so you guys can get a better view. So here is the column, here is the mobile phase. Okay, for the normal phase chromatography, the column is polar, and in the reverse phase, the column is non-polar. The mobile phase for the normal phase chromatography is reverse. Okay, which is non-polar. In the reverse phase chromatography, where the column is non-polar, we need to use the polar mobile phase, because we don't want the mobile phase to react with the column. If the mobile phase react with the column, polar and polar, it will damage the column. In the reverse phase chromatography, if the mobile phase is non-polar and the column is non-polar, it will damage the column. So we want to use on the opposite characteristic of the column. Okay, in the non-polar organic solvent used in the noble phase chromatography, such as the hexane, cyclohexane, etc. Depends on, you can refer to the table. Okay, for the reverse phase chromatography, we combine the organic solvent and water, okay, to make polar to polar solvent in the reverse phase chromatography. Okay. Okay, the next one is the HPLC pump. What is the function of HPLC pump? HPLC pump is to deliver the mobile phase across the column. Okay, the function of the pump is to deliver the mobile phase across the column to bring the analyte throughout the column. Okay, here is the example of the piston of the pump. Normally use a reciprocating pump with a pulse dampener to smooth out the flow. Okay, here is the reciprocating pump. So what is reciprocating pump is push forward and it suck. It push forward and it suck. Okay, but we have the pulse dampener over there to remove the pulse, or we will learn about that later on, about the what is the disadvantage of pulse in the HPLC. Sorry, it's a bit itchy. Okay, so we have the cam here, we have the piston, and we have the outlet and inlet check valve. Okay, what is the function of the outlet and the inlet check valve? Is a one-way valve. It means that we can only suck. Okay, we can only suck from the mobile phase container to here. Okay, so it will prevent the liquid from return back to the mobile phase container. Okay, so it's just one way. So the movement of the liquid is from one way from the mobile phase container until it reach the column and also the detector. So this is the function of the outlet check valve. So when it sucks, okay, so when it push, the mobile phase will enter. When it sucks, the mobile phase will flow to the column. So it's just one way. There is no second way. Okay, so when it's if we look here, okay, when it push, okay, the valve go upwards and then the mobile phase will enter the system. Okay, then when it's suck, it will push the liquid to the column. Okay, so it's a one way. In this picture is the single piston. Okay, in the HPLC pump, there are two types of HPLC pump, which is the single piston or double piston. Okay, in the single piston, or we call as the single pump, is the classical design of the HPLC pump. Still widely been used in the academic purposes since the price is much more affordable. Usually, if the HPLC is a single pump, usually you need to mix the mobile phase at the particular ratio prior to analysis. So it means you just have one container. If you want to perform 70-30 mobile phase ratio, so you need to mix up in one container and then you can use the HPLC. That is the criteria of the single pump. Okay, usually if you have the double mobile phase container, usually it can be double pump or quaternary. Okay, depends on the advancement of the HPLC. So today we will learn on the single and double piston only, but believe me that we in the modern days, nowadays, is already have the HPLC with the quaternary pump. Okay, don't be surprised, but there is. Okay, nowadays it's too advanced, we already have the quaternary pump, so it means that we have 4 pumps, but the common one is the single and double. Okay, however, the main disadvantage of this system, okay, causes pressure pulse. Pulse are indesirable for several reasons. Okay, the weakness of the single pump, we have the problem, we have the pulse. So when it sucks, so it will produce the pulse because it consists of a single piston. So we have the problem with the pressure pulse. So what is what are the disadvantages of the single pump or single piston? They can cause detection problem. Okay, they prevent good quantitative analysis and they can lead to early column failure. Okay, how it can actually cause detection problem? Okay, it means that your background is not that nice because of this pulse. You can have much more noise compared to double or quaternary pump. You can have much more noise. If you have much more noise, it means that you cannot have a very lower detection. Okay, you cannot have a very lower detection because you have a lot. If you add the lower detection, you will have a lot of noise. Okay, so if you cannot perform. If you have the problem with noise, the noise is high using the single pressure pump, you cannot lower the detection limit, so That's why we can say that it can cause the detection problem at lower limit of detection, because we have noise a lot at the single pump compared to double piston. Okay, and because we cannot go lower, it can prevent good quantitative analysis because we have a lot of kind of noise will disturb with the reading. Okay, so I hope this can explain about this, why it can cause detection problem and why it can prevent the good quantitative analysis. Okay. And the third one, it can lead to early column failure because of we have that pulse. So it's like in the pump, in the column, it's like it's up, down, up, down, up, down. Okay, so many times. So it will damage the particulate in the column because in the column we have small particle, right? So where it's like goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. So it will damage the particle. Okay. This system often use some sort of pulse dampening to further reduce the flow fluctuation. So usually in the single and double piston also they already put the dampener or pulse dampening. Okay. So to solve the problem with this single piston system, so we so somebody have invented the double piston system. Okay. The function of the double system of the HPLC pump is to minimize the pressure pulse. Okay, the system make the system more robust, minimum pressure pulse, and able to handle at much pressure condition as prolong the column lifetime. Okay, so we have the double pump. Okay, in the double pump we can reduce, instead of we put much pressure over here. So when we put much pressure over here, it can cause the problem with the pulse dampener. So we can divide into two. When we divide into two, we can reduce the pressure pulse. Okay. Here is the single piston of the pressure pulse. Pressure profiles is up, down, it's up and down. In the dual piston, because we divide the pressure into two, so to perform at the same efficiency, so we can have a very low pressure profiles compared to this single piston because we divide in, the pressure pulse into two, right? Okay, so we can lower the pressure pulse. Okay, because we simply divide the work on the single piston into a double piston. Okay, so in the HPLC pump, we have the change pump vs reciprocating pump. Okay, in the old time, in the early beginning of the HPLC, they use the change pump. Okay, so we have the what we call as the change. Okay, and then we push the solvent into this system slowly. Okay, for the reciprocating pump, it's like here. Okay, we have this cam. We have this cam. So I'm sure, oh, it's not described into detail. I believe that it's not necessarily to be asked in the examination, but it's just for your information that the change pump is the older kind of the HPLC pump system. Okay, there is a lot of disadvantage of the HPLC pump where you need to fill in the liquid again and again compared to the reciprocating pump. So the change pump is already obsolete. I believe you get try to Google in YouTube, you can also find about the HPLC pump, but it's not preferable. It's not preferable because in the change pump also you cannot handle at high pressure compared to reciprocating pump. There's a lot of disadvantage of the change pump compared to reciprocating pump. It's not that really important. It's just for the information. I believe I will not ask about this in your final examination. Okay, so don't worry about it. So it's just for your knowledge. Okay, the next one we will learn about the injector. Okay, previously we already learned about the mobile phase and then we learn about the pump. Okay, now we learn about the injector, the sample injection system. Of course, in nowadays we have the automatic and also the manual injection of the system of the HPLC. But today we will learn on the but the system is about the same. The 6-port injection valve, either it is manual or it is automatic, they use the same system. They use the same system, what we call as the Reodyne. But in the normal way, in the easier words, we can divide the injector into two, which is automatic and also manual. But the system is 6-port injection valve for both system. For the manual and also automatic, is kind of the 6-port injection valve, what we call as the Reodyne injector. So we have the various loop size available. Okay, various loop here. Here is the loop. Okay, here is the loop. What is the function of loop? The loop is the one where we put our sample. For example, we want to inject 20 microliter. So we need to use 20 microliter loop. Okay, we need to use 20 microliter loop. For example, the loop is 10 microliter, but we inject here. If we inject here 20 microliter, only 10 microliter we enter the system, because we have only we only have the loop size at 10 microliter. If you want to inject at 20 microliter, or you want to 20 microliter of the sample to be analyzed, so you need to use a bigger loop. Normally in the lab, they will put 20 microliter loop for the normal HPLC. For the micro HPLC, of course, the loop will be much smaller compared to the normal HPLC. We will not learn into detail about the micro HPLC or the normal HPLC, but that is just for in the information. But the loop depends on the how much you want to put your sample. If the loop is 20 microliter, but you want to inject only 10 microliter of sample, there is no problem. You just inject or load your sample 10 microliter. There is no problem. The problem is when the loop is 10 microliter, but you want to enter 20 microliter of your sample. No, only 10 microliter will store into the loop, and the other will remove to the waste container. Only 10 will enter the system, another 10 will remove to waste. Okay. Here is the how the sample load and injection. Okay. The sample injection valve to introduce the sample quantitatively onto the column without interrupting the mobile phase flow. So the Reodyne 6-port injection valve ni, the 6-port injection valve system is like kind of magic. So where you can introduce into your mobile phase without stopping the flow of the mobile phase, without interrupting the mobile phase flow. Okay, that is the magic of the sample injection valve, where we can introduce the sample without interrupting the mobile phase flow. Okay, how it actually happen, how it actually works. So look here, in the load position, you inject your sample and it will enter the sample loop. Okay, in the sample loop, for example, the sample loop here is 20 microliter. So 20 microliter will store in the loop. So the extra or the excess of the sample will go to waste. So only 20 microliter of our sample will be in the loop. So here is the where our load our sample. And if you look here, from the mobile phase to the column, it will still continuous. Okay, it will still continuous. The mobile phase will not enter the sample loop during the loading process. Again, here is the position of the loading sample, where we inject first our sample into the sample loop, and then the extra one will go into the waste. Okay, if you look at the mobile phase here, it will just enter the column without enter the sample loop. Okay, so when the injection mode, when we go to the injection mode, okay, if you look here, the mobile phase will start enter the loop. Okay, this is the loop. Okay, previously the mobile phase just enter the column. Right now the mobile phase is switched to the loop, and from the loop it will go to the column. Okay, so it's just like 1 microsecond to do this. So it will not changing, it will not interrupting the mobile phase flow. So the sample go to waste. The sample, okay, from here, before this, the sample pass through the loop, and then after that it will go to waste. In the injection mode, the sample will just go directly to waste because nothing is there. So the most important one, we want to transfer the sample from the loop into our column. Okay, in the load position, the first one, we put our sample into the loop. Okay, and the excess will go to the waste. And in the loop position, the mobile phase just go into the column. In the injection mode, that is when actually the mobile phase enter the loop and bring the sample from the loop into the column. Okay, it's like kind of the magic. Okay, so the kind of the question they will give you the figure, and then you need to describe, or you need to describe what is x, what is y. Okay, or you need, for example, to draw. Okay, so if there is lot kind of question, you need to be in your mind, or you need to understand. Okay, so if you be able to understand, I believe you can also draw the schematic diagram of this. Okay, you just simply 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, in the load position. Okay, so we need to, here is the sample. Okay, and here is the waste. Okay, here is the carrier mobile phase, and here is the column. Okay, 3 and 6 is the sample loop. Okay, so when we introduce our sample, we introduce into the loop. Okay, and then the mobile phase just enter the from this number 4 until number 5. So when we inject, okay, it's kind of reverse. So it's like from the mobile phase, and then we enter the column, and here it will go to waste. That's a lot kind of thing can be asked in the examination. But I believe I I will not be too uh, cruel to make you guys to draw exactly like this. Maybe I just give a figure that you guys need to able to describe. That's the most kind of thing that I can ask in the examination. It's actually unfair for me to let you guys to draw exactly like this. Okay. Okay, the next one we will look into the column. Okay. Okay, here is the column. Column is made of the packed particle in a column. Okay, so if you look in the uh, this figure here, okay, basically here is the column which consists of the particle of stationary phase. Okay, right? And here is the guide column. Okay, and we have the freight, and we have freight also at the end of the column, because we don't want our particle uh, what we call wasted uh, into the waste. So we want to keep the particle inside of this column. That's why we need these freights. Okay, so we have the guide column to protect the analytical column lah. So here is the analytical column, we have the guide column. Okay, so basically here is the guide. Here is the guide column, the big one here. So the whole system here we call as the guide column. Okay, so at the end of the guide we have the freight. Okay, we have the freight. So the guide column also, it has the freight. Okay, so if you look here, the guide column, okay, it has its freight. Okay, inside the guide column also have some particles. The particles inside of the guide column is the same with the particle inside of the what we call the analytical column over here. Okay, and we have here the freight at the end, at the beginning of and the end of the analytical column. So at the guide column also have freight. To freight at the analytical column also have to freight. The function of freight is to contain the particle inside of that particular column. So the freight in the analytical column is to contain the particle inside of the analytical column. The freight in the guide column is to contain the particle inside of the guide column. Okay. So the function of guide column to filter the sample to prevent filtering. What is it? Okay. Filtering of the sample to prevent clogging with the debris. Freight at the end of the column to keep the particle in. Okay, the freight at the end of the column is to keep the particles in. Okay. Okay, first thing first. Okay, let's look into the guide column. The guide column is to prevent the contamination of the expansive analytical column with fine particles that can eventually clog the mobile phase flow. So before the solvent enter the column, we need to have the guide column. So the function of the guide column is to as the layer of safety to our analytical column to prevent the contamination. So porous, it can be porous stainless steel or it can be plastic as well. Okay, the composition of the particle inside of the gut column is the same with the analytical column. Okay, particle size is large to minimize the pressure drop. When contaminated, discarded and replaced by the new one. Okay, the composition of the particle. Okay, for example, here is the C18. The particle of the inside of the gut column also C18. So the composition must be the same. But the size of the particle of the gut column, okay, should a little bit large. So because why? Because we want to minimize the pressure drop. Okay, we don't want that the particle size of the gut column cannot be smaller compared to the analytical column. So the particle size inside here cannot be smaller than this. It should be larger than this. Because for example, if the particle size here is small, so it means that the pressure over here where it's enter the analytical column, it can drop. So we want to prevent that. So particle size inside of the gut column must be large compared to the analytical column. Okay. When contaminated, we can discard and replace by a new one. So instead of we replace the analytical column, we replace the gut column. That's why if we have the problem with the, for example, splitting peak or what we call it as the column void, the first thing first, we try to change the gut column. Okay, the gut column is not that expensive compared to the analytical column. Analytical column will cost you about 1,500 to 3,000, but compared to that, the gut column cost you about 500 only. Okay, so instead of we waste 2,000, we can only replace the gut column. Okay, so that's the thing that we can try first before we replace our analytical column. Okay. HPLC is largely the domain of packed column. Stationary phase are particles which are usually about 1 to 20 micrometer in average diameter. So you can imagine that it's very small. It's like a dust, the size of a dust, the stationary phase. Very small. The micron size is so small. Okay. In the absorption chromatography, there is no additional phase on the stationary phase. Okay, so it's just basically the particle. But in the partition chromatography, the stationary phase can be coated using a solid support. Okay. Okay, if we already learned about the polar, we already learned about the normal phase and the reverse phase. In the normal phase, we use the polar column where the column made of some silica. The bed is made of silica, but we have some bonded phase bonded to the silica. For example, cyano, amino, or diol. Okay, so we have the termination on the bonded phase here. In case of it is diol. Okay. In the non-polar phase is C18. Okay. It's about C18 to about C8 termination on the bonded phase. Okay. If we see here, this is silica. Okay. The column is non-polar, and then we bonded with the C18. Okay. Here is the C18. C18 is represent the number of carbon. Okay. C18. If C8, then it should be C8. Okay. Phenyl and alkyl termination on the bonded phase. Phenyl and alkyl. Okay, phenyl and alkyl termination. So in the non-polar, the bonded phase here it must be non-polar. Okay. For the polar, the bonded here must be polar. Cyano, amino, and diol is polar. So it's bonded to the silica. So the bonded compound here is polar. Meanwhile, in the non-polar column or reverse phase column, the bonded group, functional group is polar, and which is non-polar, C18. Okay. I hope you guys still remember that the longer the chain, the more non-polar it is. Okay. I hope you guys still remember that. Okay, here is the figures of the bonded phase. Okay. Here is the alkyl, which is non-polar, or phenyl, also non-polar. We have cyano, is little bit polar, and the H bonding or H, which is polar. So if you look here, silica, the bonded thing is the functional group. Okay. If we look here, we have the non-polar functional group. Okay. If we compare here, is polar functional group. Okay. So for example, I give you the figures of this. So I want to give you a situation to analyze non-polar sample. So you need to suggest non-polar. You need to suggest what kind of column you should use. So you need to able to select which of the this stationary phase is suitable for that particular separation, and you need to discuss. For example, I give you sample. I give you the situation where you are required to analyze non-polar sample. Okay, you are required to analyze non-polar sample. Then you need to have a non-polar separation. That's so you suggest reverse phase chromatography. So you suggest reverse phase chromatography because your sample is non-polar, right? So you need to separate the non-polar. Okay, so you need to use the non-polar column. So this you suggest the reverse phase chromatography. So you choose alkyl as the stationary phase. That is the kind of thing. If I suggest, if the situation is the sample is polar, so you need to suggest using the polar stationary phase for better separation. Okay, that's the thing. Better I draw for you. If you have the polar sample, better you use polar stationary phase. If you have non-polar sample, better you use non-polar stationary phase. Okay, this for sample. For mobile phase is different story. For the mobile phase, you need to be opposite of this stationary phase because we don't want the mobile phase to damage our column. Okay. In the sample, for our sample, if our sample is polar, analyte is polar, we want to separate our analyte, better we need to use the polar stationary phase because we want the analyte to interact with our stationary phase to produce a better separation. If we use polar sample, if our sample is polar but we react with the non-polar column, it will not react. So they will just elute. There is no separation will happen. That's why for the sample, it needs to have similar properties to our stationary phase. Okay, I hope you guys don't get confused. The mobile phase must be opposite because we don't want to react with our column as much as possible. Okay, the next one, detector. The next component of HPLC is the detector. Now we will learn about the requirements of an HPLC detector. The first one, of course, we need to have the detector at high sensitivity, minimum interference from mobile phase. Okay, good stability and reproducibility. It means it's stable. If we run, today we get 1 ppm. We want it run at the second time also get 1 ppm. We don't want at run 1 ppm and second run we get 1.5. It's not good. Linear response to solute. Okay, what is mean by linear response to solute? As the concentration increase, also with the detection. We don't want that the linearity as the detection. My pen is not working. Okay, we don't want that when the concentration increase and then it reach the limit. We don't want that. We want as linear as possible. We need to have a very short response time so it can give you a better reading. Respond to all solutes in a mixture so it can detect many kind of analytes as it can. If possible, the detector also be non-destructive, okay, and temperature stability. Okay. Here is the common HPLC detector: RI, UV-Vis, DAD, fluorescence, ECD, ELSD, and MS. Okay. For this HPLC, we will touch on the RI, refractive index, UV-Vis, photodiode array detector, or we call as the DAD, and also fluorescence. In UTM, we don't have the refractive index. In UTM, we don't have the refractive index. Okay. In UTM, we have the UV-Vis, we have the DAD, and we have the fluorescence. Okay. But if I'm not mistaken, the fluorescence spectroscopy is the fluorescence HPLC currently is under maintenance. The one we have now is UV-Vis and also DAD. We also have the ultra HPLC at C19. Okay, here is the refractive index detector, the first detector we will learn. Okay, here is the incident beam. Okay, now here is the sample cell, here is the reference cell. Okay, that's why I want to say that the mobile phase refractive index must different compared to the sample. Okay, for example, in this reference cell is our mobile phase. Okay, so if the sample and the reference cell and in the mobile phase in the reference cell have the refractive index, the incident beam will not be deflected. So nothing change. What incident it will get reached to the detector. That will happen if the RI or refractive index the same between the sample and also the mobile phase. Okay, so in the refractive index, it's happened that when you have the sample go through the sample cell, if your analytes have different refractive index with the mobile phase, it will deflect the incident beam. It will refract the incident beam. The change in the incident or the deflected beam will be detected by the detector. Okay, that is that is the mechanism of refractive index detector. Okay, analytes change the refractive index of light in a proportional amount of the concentration. The higher the concentration of the light, the higher the diffraction. Okay, heat can change the RI of the mobile phase, so thermal control so important. Okay, usually we just run our HPLC in the room condition between 24 to 27 degrees Celsius. That's why you need to have the air conditioner for the HPLC. The first thing of the function of the air conditioner is to maintain the humidity. Okay, and then the second one is to maintain the temperature, because in the RI slightly different of temperature and can also affect the refractive index. Okay, RI is ideal for analyzing complex sugar and carbohydrates which have no chromophore, fluorescence or electrochemical activities. Okay, why we need RI? Because we have UV already, or we have the DAD. The DAD also use the same concept of the UV detection of the wavelength. But if, for example, but the requirement for that to be able, that we need to have the compound with chromophore. But what happens if the compound don't have the chromophore? Can it be detected using the fluorescence? Can it be detected using the DAD? Can it be detected using the UV? No. So if we encountered the analytes or the compound that doesn't have any chromophore, okay, I think we already discussed about the chromophore thingy. It's related to here. I think you guys need to read back in your introduction of the electrical instrumentation or in the spectroscopy. You need to read back about that. DAD UV cannot be used to analyze the compound without the chromophore. Okay, so to counter the problem, we can choose, or we can use the refractive index detector. Okay, so if the analyte doesn't have any no chromophore or fluorescence or electrochemical activities, we can use the RI. Okay, analytes usually have different RI compared to mobile phase. It's an universal type of detector. So the refractive index detector is the universal type of the detector. So it's not necessarily the analyte must have chromophore or not. It can detect both. But again, the refractive index of the sample must be different compared to the refractive index of the mobile phase. Okay, that is the condition. Okay, as long you be able to find the mobile phase with different refractive index of your sample, so we can do refractive index analysis using refractive index. Again, that is the famous kind of question can be asked in the examination. Okay, give you the structure of the compound A and B, one have chromophore, one and the other one doesn't have chromophore, please choose appropriate HPLC detector and discuss why you choose that particular detector. Okay, that's the kind of thing, okay, can be asked during the examination, or the things that you need to understand in your future career when you encounter the sample, and then you need to choose the what kind of the detector suitable. For example, you want to analyze sugar doesn't have chromophore, so you cannot you cannot suggest, or you cannot use the HPLC DAD or HPLC UV, so you need to proceed with the HPLC RID or refractive index detector. Okay, here is the plus or minus for refractive index detector. Okay, for the RI detector, it measure bulk property. So it's not necessarily the compound needs to have chromophore or not. It measure a bulk property. Nearly universal. So nearly you can detect everything as long the RI differ than the mobile phase. Comparable response for different analytes. Okay, detect species with no chromophore. This is the advantage of the RI. Okay, so you need to understand this. Okay, the minus. Okay, the RI, it can be affected by the temperature, so you need to control the temperature carefully. Compared to the UV and the DAD, if you analyze the analyte with the chromophore, the refractive index detector sensitivity is lower. Okay, again, if you compare of the analysis of the analyte with chromophore using the DAD or UV, the detector of the RI, the sensitivity of the RI is less compared to UV and DAD. And for the RI, we cannot perform gradient illusion. Why? Why we cannot perform gradient illusion? Because in the reference cell, we need to use a single ratio of the mobile phase. So we cannot change the mobile phase composition. If we change the mobile phase composition, we change the refractive index of our mobile phase. So the result will not be consistent. So that's the problem with the refractive index detector. So this is the kind of the question. Okay, for example, please discuss the advantages and disadvantages of this particular detector. Okay, so you need to be able to discuss. Okay, now is the UV vis detector. I believe we already learned a lot about the UV vis detector. In the figure here is the conventional type of the UV vis in the HPLC. Why is conventional? Because still using the mercury lamp. Mercury lamp can offer you 254 nanometer wavelength, or we can call as the universal wavelength detector. Okay. If you look here, we have the reference solution, or which is not flowing, and here we have the on the L1 part. In the L1 part, where actually we introduce our sample to the detector. Okay, so if we look over here, we have two kind of detection system here, photodiode 1 and photodiode 2. Okay, at the detector, it has two photodiodes, where the photodiode 2 is to measure the reference solution, and the photodiode 1 to measure the sample. So when the analyte reach the detector, it will detect the differences of the radiation absorption between these two cells. Okay, so when it's happen, it will cause the detector to detect the differences between these two. Okay, that's how the conventional type of UV-Vis works. Okay, but don't worry about that. I won't go into detail about that, how the mechanism. This is just for the knowledge. Okay. For the UV-Vis, it can scan range of UV light to detect molecule with chromophores. Again, in the UV-Vis, the compound or the molecules or the sample must have chromophores. Usually, having a range between 190 nanometer wavelength to 600 nanometer wavelength. So it will cover the UV and also visible region. Okay, low flow cell volume, okay, 1 to 10 microliter per sample or per injection. Single wavelength spectrophotometer, this is the conventional one. Use a source lamp to emit a single wavelength. Mercury, 254 nanometer wavelength. This is the example. Okay, but today we already have the variable wavelength spectrophotometer, so we can detect at wide range of UV and visible range. Okay, for example, here is deuterium light source, which allow us to analyze between 190 and 360. Okay, I believe we should have that figure, right? Oh, I think we already discussed in the chapter 1, so I won't discuss into detail about that. Okay, the next detector of the HPLC is the variable multi wavelength UV vis absorption detector. Okay. Okay, previously we have the conventional. This is the single one. Okay, now we have the variable or multi-wavelength UV vis absorption detector. Okay, so we included by combining two kind of source, which is deuterium and tungsten, so it can covers between 190 to about 900 nanometer wavelength. So what happens is when we want to analyze something between 190 to 380 nanometer wavelength, so we will use the deuterium lamp to as the polychromatic light source. So at the diffraction grating, we can get the particular wavelength between 190 to 380 nanometer wavelength. And if, for example, we want to analyze something between 380 to 900 nanometer wavelength, so we will use the tungsten lamp, okay, to produce the a single or desired wavelength that we want at the diffraction grating. Okay, so here what happen is that, okay, for example, we want to analyze something, we open either one to produce the desired polychromatic light source, so we can get a particular range. For example, our sample is at 240, so we need to have the light source that can cover that range. So can we use tungsten lamp? No, we need. So the system will automatically select the deuterium lamp to offer the polychromatic light source, and then from polychromatic light source, the light will hit the diffraction grating. At the diffraction grating, the polychromatic will produce a monochromatic light source. For example, previously at 240. So at 240, okay, we have the reference site and also the mirror, half mirror, and the light, the radiation will also enter the flow cell of the injection, okay, after the column. So then the sample side light receiving the section output for data processing. So here the differences between what is actually reach the detector and also the reference will be detected by the detector. Okay. Okay. Here is the plus and minus or advantages or disadvantages for multi-wavelength of UV absorption detector. I don't discuss into detail about the single detector because it is a kind of conventional one. But today we focus on the variable wavelength. Okay. So it's measure of a specific property. Okay, nearly universal but must have the chromophore. Most common of all detectors. Okay, UV-Vis is the most common HPLC detector among HPLC, and UV-Vis potential to provide qualitative info. Okay, what is meant by potential to provide qualitative info? That we need we can perform the qualitative analysis, but we need to have the standard for comparison. Unless you have the mass spectrometry detector, that is another story. UV-Vis is simple and also a robust technique. Okay, the lamp or the detector, okay, can last for if we can take care of it. Okay, it can last more than 10 years. Okay. Okay. However, for the UVs also have the disadvantages. Fair sensitivity is not that less sensitive. is sensitive for at ppm level, I can say, but it's not until ppb or ppt level, and it can miss some important light, especially the one that without chromophore. That is the weakness of the disadvantage of the UVVs. Okay, the next detector is the fluorescence. Okay, if we look here, we have the lamp, sample cell, collection cell, and transducer. Okay, it's located at 90 degree. Why is that? Okay, because we don't want any interference come directly from the lamp reach to the detector. Okay, we don't want that to happen. Okay, we only want uh, to to detect the wavelength that produced by the sample, because fluorescence is part of the emission spectroscopy. If we compare to UVVs, it's a kind of absorption spectroscopy. So we would like to know how many light reach to the detector and how many light absorbed by the sample. Okay, that's how we can achieve the absorption reading by what we call read the differences between the initial of light incident or radiation of incident and radiation that reach after it's hit our sample. Okay, but of fluorescence is different story. We don't really care about the light of incident, but we want to know how much the sample can produce the light. So we need to measure the light that emit by our sample, not by the lamp. So that's why we put the detector at the 90 degree. After we radiate the sample with the lamp, and then the sample if it's be able to fluorophore, or it can give fluorescence, so it can emit the light, so it can reach the detector. So any interference from the lamp can be avoided or can be deducted. Okay, if we, for example, we put the detector over here, so we will have two kind of we will have the interference from the lamp, because we need to measure the one that absorb in the sample cell, the one of the wavelength that emitted by our sample, but also we cannot be able to avoid the radiation produced by the lamp or the light produced by the lamp. So that's why we need to put at the 90 degree angle. Okay. Okay, this is how the schematic diagram of the detector. Okay, so here is the incident, here is the flow of the eluent. Okay, so we incite the UV source to the sample, and then the detector at 90 degree angle. Okay, in the normal UV we put here, right? Okay, but we put for the fluorescence, we put at the 90 degree angle, because we want to measure the light fluoresce by the sample. Okay, fluorescence detector are among the most sensitive of the HPLC detector, and depending on the compound, can be 10 to 1000 times more sensitive than UV detectors analyzing strong UV absorbing compounds. Okay, if the compound can be fluorescence, okay, usually the sensitivity of the compound is great if compared to UV-vis analysis, but the compound must be able to fluorophore or fluorescence. But if the compound cannot be fluorescence, we submit to UV-vis detector only. But if the compound can be fluorescence, better if we use fluorescence HPLC, because the sensitivity of the analyte that can fluorescence is much more higher at the fluorescence detector compared to the UV-vis. The fluorescence detector is based on the principle that some compound fluoresce when bombarded with the UV light. If the compound of interest fluoresces, this is a very sensitive detector, so the compound need to be fluorescence. But if the compound is not fluoresces, so you need to forget about it, you just submit for RI or the UV-vis. But if your compound be able to fluoresce, better you submit for fluorescence HPLC, because it can provide a better sensitivity. The analyte is excited by light commonly at 254 nanometer wavelength from a low pressure mercury lamp. The light is absorbed and molecule is excited and give off light of different wavelength. This wavelength is monitored by detector which sits at right angles to the UV light source used to excite the analyte. Okay, let's look on the advantages and disadvantages of fluorescence. Okay. On the advantageous side of the fluorescence HPLC measure of specific property is mean that the compound need to be fluorescence. So when it can go to specific, so it can neglect the thing that is not fluorescence. So it can neglect all the interference as much as possible. That is the advantages. But of course, the disadvantage, it can less detection of a lot of compound. It can only detect of the fluorescence compound. That's why the fluorescence is not universal, limited application to a particular fluorescence compound. Okay, but when it measure the specific property, it can enhance that particular detection, so it can increase the sensitivity. Okay, so highly selective as well. Second most common of all detectors, high sensitivity, can interrogate very small volume of sample. Okay, that is the advantages of the fluorescence. And of course, the disadvantage is not universal and limited application to fluorescence compound only. Okay, the next and the last detector we will discuss on the detectors, which is the DAD. Okay, DAD also we use the same concept with the multi-wavelength of the UV vis detector, where we use the deuterium lamp and tungsten lamp. Okay, but the differences that we actually take all the reading at the same time. We take all the reading at the same time. I think we already discussed about it. Okay, where we hit the light source, we hit the cell, and then we measure all the wavelength at the same time. Or it's not actually possible to reach the all the wavelength at the same time, because if we doing that, we need, for example, 200 to 800, we need to have 600 photodiode array at the same time. In our DAD, there is actually about 8 diode to accept the radiation. So we can particularly set about maybe 8 to 12 wavelength at the same time. For example, we want to analyze at 254, 270. So we can set about that. We can activate. So we can analyze multiple wavelength at the same time. So scan a range of UV rays to detect molecule with chromophores, usually having a range 190 to 800 nanometer wavelength, capable of measuring multiple wavelength at a time, contains holographic data which spread the compound light into individual wavelength, and the photosensitive diode can sense which wavelength were absorbed. So at the end here, we have the photodiode. Okay, we have the photodiode. Okay, multiple photodiode lah, I can see. Okay, what makes different than UVs? We can run at multiple wavelength at the same time. The light source, the DAD hit the sample first before the diffraction grating. So the diffraction grating is after the sample. It's not that before the sample. Okay. The last one is the HPLC-MS. Okay, forgive me. We have the last one. HPLC, the most powerful type of detector, but the MS, mass spectrometer components, we will discuss into detail in the separated chapter. Widely used in pharmaceutical laboratory and research and development, the principle of HPLC-MS is capable of analyzing and providing molecular entity of wide range of components. Volatile mobile phases must be used here. Okay. The advantages of the MS, okay, mass spectrometer, it can provide the identity of the compound without the standard. Okay, if we use other kind of detector, RI, DAD or UV, we need to have this standard comparison. Okay, we need to have the standard. So we run the standard, and then we run the sample. For example, the sample can provide few peaks. So we can say that this peak is belong to this standard. Or maybe we have this standard, and then we have this standard, and then we have this standard. And then when we run our sample, okay, when we run the sample, it shows only this peak. So we can show that the sample contain this analyte or this standard as well. Okay, that is how the other kind of detector words, RI, the fluorescence, the AD. But for the HPLMS, it's a different story. From the HPLC-MS, we actually will look into the what we call spectrum. Okay, it will provide the spectrum. For the particular peak, it can give you the spectrum. Okay, so it can give you the ion spectrum. From the ion spectrum, it can give you the suggestion of the molecular weight. From the suggestion of the molecular weight, it can be used, search in the library to exactly detect the compound without the standard. Okay, that's why, for example, in the case you receive a sample, but you don't know what kind of the components or analytes contain the sample. So what is the best solution is you run using the HPLC-MS or GC-MS, because you don't know what is inside. So you are not possible for you to run a million kind of standard to make to identify what kind of the component inside of your sample. So you don't know. If you don't know any, then you submit for the HPLC-MS. So from the HPLC-MS, we can use the library search and to detect the compound. After that, then only we can buy the standard and use that for to perform the qualitative and quantitative analysis further. Okay. What else? Volatile mobile phases must be used here in the MS. Okay, the mobile phase must be volatile because we want to produce ion. Okay, we will learn about that later on in the mass spectrometer, so don't go too fast. Just need to know until that. But on the mass spectrometer, we will focus into detail. So don't get dizzy, don't get too what we call too hasty in here. Okay, it is difficult to use mass spectrometer with liquid chromatography because the mobile phase must be removed before the analyte can enter the detector. A number of interfaces have been developed to solve this problem. Electrospray, ion spray, thermospray, and CMS becoming more common. Okay, forget about this currently because we will learn about that in details in the mass spectrometer. Okay, but here is the information. Usually in the liquid chromatography mass spectrometer, not usually, the previously the all time ago, it's very difficult to perform the mass spectrometer analysis using the liquid chromatography because we need to remove the mobile phase, because we need to remove the dissolution, because we already learned, right, in the SCPOS we need to have to remove the mobile phase first, okay, before we can produce the sample become the solid particle, and then solid particle it becomes the ions, okay, or atom and ions. Okay, that particular ions is useful for MS detection, so that is why it's kind of very difficult at those time. But nowadays a lot of number of interfaces have been developed to solve this problem, and today's the LC-MS is what is actually is a gold instrument, what we call is a great instrument for particular analysis, because it can provide the searching much more faster, much more better, and at higher sensitivity. Okay, so we already end on the detector part. Okay, there's a lot kind of the question can be asked, or please describe this kind of detector, please kind describe of detector, or the easier kind of the question, please state two detectors of the HPLC, for example. But the if it little bit harder, okay, please differentiate between this and this, or discuss the advantages and disadvantages. And the highest level of the question, they give you some kind of the situation, and then you need to decide which kind of detector you need to use. For example, okay, they give you the sample without the chromophore, so which one of the detector you need to use? So you need to suggest for some for example the RI, refractive index detector. For example, you want to analyze and you want to confirm, or you want to find which wavelength is suitable for your sample. So it's better for you to use a DAD, because photodiode array detector you can write at the multiple wavelength. That's such as example. Okay, so there's a lot kind of the question can be asked. Okay, for example, the compound is fluorescence. It's not fluorescence. It can only detect by the UV. So you can suggest using UV because why? Okay, you need to discuss. Okay, UV. The compound have chromophore. It's not fluorescence, so you need to use UV, not the RI, because RI, the sensitivity is not good enough compared to the UV. Okay, that is the kind of the answer that I expect you guys to be able to answer. You need to answer based on understanding. I believe if you guys be able to understand the concept, you guys be able to answer the question. Okay, here is the mode of separation in the HPLC. We have the normal phase. I believe we already learned where the mobile phase is non-polar and the stationary phase is polar. On the reverse phase, the mobile phase is polar, but the column is non-polar. Okay, we also have the ion exchange, but we don't call it as the HPLC. Okay, when we use this, we call as the ion exchange chromatography. I believe we already learned about the ion exchange chromatography basic principle, where the stationary phase is made of is for separation of salts and ionic compound. Okay, and the last mode of separation of HPLC is the size exclusion. Okay, so we can analyze the compound at different sizes. So let's look the differences between normal phase and the reverse phase. If the stationary phase is more polar than the mobile phase, the separation is deemed the normal phase. Okay. If the stationary phase is the more polar than the mobile phase, it means that the mobile phase is non-polar. Okay, then we call as the normal phase. If the stationary phase is less polar, okay, if the stationary phase is less polar or non-polar, or we can call it as the reverse phase. In reverse phase HPLC, the retention time of a compound increases with the decreasing polarity of the particular species. Okay. Okay. For example, you have compound A, B, and C. Okay. The polarity of the compound increasing from A to C. So C is the most polar compound. Okay. For example, in the normal phase. In the normal phase, the column is polar or non-polar. In the normal phase, the column is polar. So when the column is the polar, C will interact the most with the column. So it will elute the last. Because C is most polar, right? The column is polar. So polar and polar, they will love each other. They will interact longer. Meanwhile, for A and B, especially A is non-polar. It will not interact with the column. So it will elute earlier. So if we have the chromatogram like this, okay, this supposed to be A, here is B, and here is C. But if you use the reverse phase, in the reverse phase, the column is non-polar. So the non-polar compound will interact longer compared to the polar compound. Okay, because non-polar love non-polar. Okay, so it will be reverse. Okay. Okay, so it becomes CBA. Because C elute earlier because it doesn't react at all with the stationary phase, so it will elute first. Meanwhile, for A, because it loved the most with the stationary phase, so it will elute last. So that is why this is what is mean by this. In the RP HPLC or reverse phase HPLC, the retention time of compound increase with the decreasing polarity. Okay, or retention time decrease with increasing the polarity. The key to an effective and efficient separation is to determine the appropriate ratio polar and non-polar components in the mobile phase. So we need to because the stationary phase we cannot change during the analysis. What we can do is we can change the parameter of the mobile phase. So we can adjust the ratio of the mobile phase. The goal is for all the compounds to elute in the short in as a short time as possible, while still allowing for the resolution of the individual peak. So I think we already learned about the band broadening. Okay, if we allow them to separate longer, at the longer time the peak become more broadened. Okay, for example, let's say this is the same peak. Let's say this is the same peak. Okay, if we allow the separation to be happen at the longer time, the peak will become broadened. So we need to keep the analysis as short as time as possible. Okay, to have a sharp peak. Okay, to avoid any peak broadening. But at the same time, we need to have a better resolution. Okay, I think you guys already learn about resolution. It means that a better separation between the peaks. We don't want it to be so fast. Okay, sorry, maybe. Okay, we want it to be fast. Okay, but we don't want it to be non-resolution. We need to have it to be separated very well. So we need to have like this. Okay, we need to have baseline resolution, but we don't want the analysis at a longer time, because if we want sorry, can I delete? Okay, we don't want to analyze a longer time because we want to avoid peak broadening. Okay, the longer the analysis, it can cause peak broadening more. So we need to make the analysis as short as possible, but still allow for the resolution of the individual peaks. It means that we need to allow the separation for individual peaks. Okay, here is the choice of LC mode. I won't discuss into this because I believe it's not easily to understand if you are not able to run by yourself. So don't need to remember about this. Okay. Here is the reverse phase HPLC. You have the A, B, and C. Okay, the carbon chain length of the sample C is much more longer. So when C is much more longer, C is much more non-polar. Remember, the column in the reverse phase is non-polar. Okay, so the non-polar compound will react the most with our analyte, with our stationary phase. Okay, so C, of course, will be eluted the last. A is the shorter one, so it's less non-polar compared to the others. Okay, so it will react C is the non-polar. C is the most non-polar. A is the least non-polar, so it's little bit react with the column. It's little bit less react with the column, so it will elute earlier. Okay, because it has less polarity. The one that has higher polarity will react with the column the most, because the column in the reverse phase is the most polar. I think we already discussed this in the previous slides many times, right? Okay. Okay, if you look here, A, B, and C has been discussed here. C, as is the most non-polar, it will react the most with the stationary phase, so it will retain the longest. A is the least non-polar, so it will elute earlier since it has least interaction with the stationary phase. Okay, if you look here, we have different mobile phase system. We have the Astronautride and water at 70-30, 60-40, and 50-50. Okay, if you look here, okay, as we already learned about the mobile phase, water is the most polar compound, so we can adjust the polarity of the mobile phase by adding the organic solvent. In this example, we use the Astronautride. So as the amount of the water increasing, so as the polarity of the mobile phase. So mobile phase polarity increasing from left to right because the amount of water also increase. So if let's say if we want to reduce the polarity of the mobile phase, so we need to reduce the amount of water, we need to increase the amount of organic solvent. Okay. If you look over here, okay, as the polarity of mobile phase increasing, the separation also improve. Okay, the separation also improve. Okay, If you look over here, the sample is basically is non-polar. Basically, sample is basically is not that really polar. So when we use the solvent which is non-polar, so the mobile if we use the mobile phase non-polar, so it can bring the analyte faster. Okay, if we use in this condition when the polarity of the mobile phase is increasing, but our analyte of sample is little bit non-polar, so it will somehow interact more with the stationary phase compared to the mobile phase. Okay, because the mobile phase here is polar, right? Mobile phase here is polar, but most of the analyte here is little bit non-polar. So most of them will interact longer with the stationary phase. Compared to here, the mobile phase is non-polar. It's less polarity compared to here. So the non-polarity of the mobile phase cause stronger elution of the analyte. Okay, this is how we be able to explain this graph. Okay, this is the comparison between the normal phase and reverse phase chromatography. Okay, solid polarity A, B, C. So polarity A is higher compared to B and C. In the normal phase chromatography, the column is polar, so the polar compound will eluted the last. So A is the more polar, so A will be eluted the last. So at the low polarity, okay, at the low polarity, the compound is polar. For example, A is polar. At low polarity, the compound is polar, so it will react least with the mobile phase. So the retention time will be longer. Okay, to make the retention time become faster, so we need to increase the polarity. Okay. In the reverse phase, if you look over here, okay, in the reverse phase, the column is non-polar, so the non-polar compound will react the most with the stationary phase. Okay, So the C compound, since it the least polar or the non-polar, okay, so it will react with this stationary longer, so it will retain. Okay, in the high polarity mobile phase, since the C compound is non-polar, it will not react with the mobile phase, so it will retain longer with the column. But in the medium polarity of the mobile phase, when the polarity of the mobile phase is lower, so the analyte will react more with the mobile phase, so it will elute earlier, faster. Okay, this is how the concept of the normal phase and the reverse phase. Okay, the next one, we will learn about the elution mode. Elution is a process which species are washed through a chromatographic column by adding fresh solvent. Okay, that is the definition of the elution. Okay, it's a process which species are washed through a chromatographic column by adding fresh solvent. It means that we continuously bring the mobile phase to bring our analyte throughout the column to the detector. So we always continuously adding the mobile phase. So this is the process of elution. In the elution mode of the HPLC, as has been described before, we have the isocratic elution and gradient elution. In the isocratic elution, mobile phase composition constant in a run. So I explain again. For example, we use H2O and methanol. Okay. Let's say for time taken for the whole process is 50 minutes. So the whole time, the composition remain the same. So for example, we begin at 70-30, so we maintain 70-30. Okay, from the beginning until the end of the analysis. In the gradient elution, mobile phase composition changes during run. Strength of the eluent increase or decrease during run to obtain a better separation at a faster time. Okay. Why we need to have the gradient elution? Because we want to separate it better, or we want to separate it faster. Okay. So in the gradient elution, we can change this composition. For example, at the beginning we begin at 70-30, and then at the middle we change to 50-50, and at the end we change to, for example, 30-70. Okay, so in the HPLC we can do that. In the GC, can we do that? We will learn about the gas chromatography after this, but of course we cannot do that. Okay, here is the isocratic elution. This is the example of the figure. Mobile phase solvent composition remain constant time, best for simple separation. At this figure, our analytes cannot well separated. Okay, so we use the gradient elution. Mobile phase solvent composition increase with time, best for analysis of the complex sample. So if you look over here, we start the mobile phase composition maybe at the low polarity to, maybe here is the middle polarity. Okay, so at the middle polarity, if you look here, the A and the solvent peak, they merge. B and C, they merge as well. But F, because it's not react with the mobile phase very great, so it will eluted the last. So we can start using the gradient. Okay, let's say we start using the low polarity mobile phase to provide a better expression for the solvent and A. So it become this, and B and C. So as the time increasing, okay, we change the gradient to increase the polarity of the solvent. So the F1, the F analyte, which is before this not react with the analyte, the F analyte that is not react with the mobile phase, is not eluted with the mobile phase, it can react better. Okay, so it can increase the elution time. So it can fasten the elution time of the compound F. Okay, again, if you look over here, as the time increasing of the analysis time increasing, the peak tend to broaden. So we want to avoid that. So that's why we use the gradient elution. We want to solve this problem. The first thing first, we want to separate the things, and then we want to fasten the elution time. That is the important why we need the gradient elution. Isocratic versus gradient elution. Isocratic elution has constant mobile phase composition, can often use one pump. Okay, for isocratic elution, we don't have any kind of problem if we want to use one pump. You can also mix the solvent together ahead of time. Okay, if you use a single pump, not a double piston, we need to mix the solvent together ahead of time. Simpler non-mixing chamber required, or the gradient controller is not required for isocratic elution. For the gradient elution, we have a varying mobile phase composition. Use multiple pumps whose output is mixed together, often 2-4 pumps, binary to quaternary, dual or quaternary system. Okay, changing mobile phase component change the polarity index. Advantages can be used subsequently to elute some compound that were previously stuck on the column. Okay, for example, in the previous one, the F1 is stuck too long in the column, so we increase the polarity to make it interact more with the mobile phase, so it can elute earlier. Okay, the disadvantage, some additional wear on the stationary phase because we always change the mobile phase composition. Okay, column has to re-equilibrate to original condition after each run. Okay, the problem is that we need to re-equilibrate the column. Okay, in the isocratic, you run 50 minutes. Okay, sorry. In the isocratic, you run for 50 minutes, and then you want to perform next run. So you can just run immediately. But for the gradient elution, because the mobile phase composition is increasing, so you need to wait until it goes back to its original condition before you can run again. So it will take some time. Okay, it's just okay. In the HPLC, it's not like a magic. Okay, it's because the gradient is increasing slowly. Okay, if you want to perform the next run, you need to wait until it goes down to its original or the starting point for the mobile phase. For example, 70-30 is the starting point. Why my pen is not working? Okay, 70-30. For example, here is 70-30, and then the final one is 30-70. Okay, If you want to run the next sample, you need to wait until it become 70-30 again. So you need to re-equilibrate until it reach the original condition, 70-30. That is what you mean by this. Okay. So it will take a longer time, but it can provide you a better expression. Why not? Okay. It has what we call advantages and disadvantages. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. For me, if possible, I prefer to use isocratic because it's less easier. It's less easier because it's the easiest one. Okay, but if I stumble with this kind of problem, of course I will use the gradient. Okay, wavelength setting in the HPLC. Okay, I need to remind you guys that every compound, they have different absorption or max absorption. Okay, if you look here, every compound has different absorbance. Okay, for example, the compound is thiamulite. At 254 nanometer wavelength, it shows a weak absorption. At 212 and 208, their absorption is comparable. Maybe it's comparable. Maybe here is only 212. At 208, the sensitivity is much more better. Okay, here is the real application of the analysis of the gallic acid and catechin. Okay. Okay. Here is we using the DAD. Okay, at the DAD we can run the analysis at multiple wavelength. So in this example, we run 270, 280, and 285 nanometer wavelength at the same time. Okay, okay. It's not necessarily if one compound grade at 270, another compound can also absorb at high intensity at 270. Some of the compound sometimes it shows better sensitivity at lower wavelength, and another compound it shows better sensitivity at higher wavelength. Okay, in this example, for example, at 270 nanometer wavelength, gallic acid 350. Okay, as we increase the nanometer wavelength or wavelength of the radiation, the sensitivity decrease. Okay, okay, but for the catechin, okay, it shows a different pattern. At 270 nanometer wavelength, the absorption at 250 MAU, the height, okay, about 250. But as we increase the nanometer wavelength, it shows the reverse one of the gallic acid is increased. Okay, so we need to find something in the middle. Okay, we need to find something in the middle. So in this example, the best one is 280 nanometer wavelength, where the gallic acid is still at about 350, and also we get a good one for catechin. Okay, so we need to find a optimal wavelength. It's not necessarily at 270 nanometer wavelength. It show the best for everybody. Okay, it's not necessarily if you use at the higher wavelength or the longer wavelength, it can be better at all the compounds. Okay, so we need to find in the middle something that can benefit all. Okay. Okay, the last thing is the advantages of HPLC over the, not the last thing, because after this we will discuss on the application of the HPLC on forensic application. Okay, before we go into the last thing, let's discuss on the advantages of HPLC over other chromatography techniques. HPLC is fast and efficient separation of mixtures, high resolution power. It's suitable for analyzing very complex mixture. Okay, especially the compound with the high boiling points that cannot be analyzed using GC. Accurate quantitative measurement, qualitative analysis is also possible. Repetitive and reproducible analysis using the same column. Okay, HPLC is more versatile than GC in some respect. Only volatile and thermally stable solutes can be analyzed using GC, but with the HPLC there is no such restriction. If we after this we will learn about the gas chromatography. In gas chromatography, the compound must be volatile, but in HPLC there is no such condition. Either it's volatile, it's non-volatile, it can be analyzed using the HPLC, but depending on the detector. For example, if the UV, we need to have the compound with the chromophore. Okay, no problem with fluctuation. Internal standard is not a requirement. In the HPLC, there is seldom problem with the fluctuation. so we can use the internal. It's not necessarily to use internal standard. We have learned right about the internal standard external calibration previously. So internal standard is not a requirement in HPLC compared to GC. GC have a lot kind of problem with the what we call fluctuation. So we reached the end of the topic, which is the last one, which the applications of HPLC. So should be S. So there are lots of applications here. I just give you a few examples of the application of HPLC. For example, for drug and poison analysis, for the drug and poison which are not suitable to be analyzed using, for example, GC. Okay, for example, it's not that what we call the boiling point of the drug and the poison is not that great, or maybe they is thermally labile, so we submitted for the HPLC. Of course, the second one, the explosive is thermally labile, it's not stable under what we call temperature, high temperature, so we need to submit the explosive analysis under HPLC analysis. Okay, antibiotic and pharmaceuticals, same goes the reason with drug and poisons. Of course, the GC still can analyze a lot kind of the antibiotic and pharmaceuticals drugs or pharmaceutical compounds, but as the complement to the weakness of the GC, so we need the HPLC. And then of course the carbohydrate analysis, carbohydrate, okay, that I can give you example. For example, we would like to know either is there any significant what we call adulteration of the honey, for example. For example, we will learn about for example, if we talk about the honey, okay, honey is kind of very valuable. Okay, so a lot of people would like to adulterate the honey instead of, for example, they sell the pure honey. They want to what we call save the money or gain more profit. So they mix the honey with some kind of carbohydrates such as sugar, maybe cane sugar, maybe corn sugar. So they adulterate so that they can gain what we call more profit about it. So through the HPLC, since carbohydrate is kind of what we call the boiling point of the carbohydrate is so high, okay, so we need that HPLC, okay, as the what we call a great instrument to analyze the carbohydrate. Okay, okay, that's it about it, I think. HPLC, if you have anything, okay, of course next week we will have the Q&A session, so you can ask during that time. Okay, see you again later.